Jackal Among Snakes. Author, Nemorosus. Chapter 131, Durran. Argrave, without much option, took Durran to an establishment that he knew had private rooms for eating. Dawn was just arriving, so their timing could not be better. Some vessels ran the place, but they worked for Durran, so Brim would likely never find out about them. Even still, ever cautious, Argrave had warded a conversation. Of all the characters in Heroes of Durran, barring the custom-made one, Argrave had definitely played Durran the most. Melanie stood at a close second. They were fun to play, mainly, but Argrave liked their personalities the most. He understood them well. It helped him plan a course of action for this conversation rather quickly, suppressing his panic. Durran was a fairly tall and lithe man with light brown skin and wavy brown hair that generally contributed to his natural charm. With his robe set aside, one could see the golden tattoos all along his skin, some marred by scars. Unlike during the raid, he did not wear his wyvern scale armor, instead bearing simple brown leathers. "Trying to kill me with the weight of debt?" inquired Durran, who had taken 2 chairs to both sit and support his feet. "This place is expensive. If you're destitute after raiding Argent, I've got to seriously question if you can understand this conversation through your haze of stupidity," Argrave returned, leaving his arms atop the table. "You'd have to be stupid to lose that much money, after all." Durran laughed, then set his glaive against the wall. The cloth wrapped around the blade fell away briefly, revealing a black edge that didn't look metallic. "Shiny bits of metal don't mean much in the mountains, unless it's steel. But I know you spend more time away from the mountains than most," Argrave said, and Durran merely grinned, saying nothing. Surprised Bormusk isn't here. "Busy feeding the poor, saving people, giving sermons?" Durran frowned. "Gods above, how much do you know?" He took his feet off the chair and leaned in. "What's my mother's name?" Trick question. "You don't know?" Argrave shook his head. Durran leaned back. "Was asking as a joke, but..." He looked at Annalise and Argrave. "You 3? What in the gods' names are you? Super spies?" "Can't guess your angle." "Northerners, Northern elves, at that, sticking out like pearls in the sand." "I'm the only one you need to worry about." Argrave shook his head. "So, you want to illuminate me on this genius idea you had to ruin everyone's plans?" "Yours, mine." "Were you feeling a little suicidal today?" Durran looked uneased, but he set his feet back on the chair. "I don't know. I had to know who in the world was talking about something I've done my best to keep quiet. I kept thinking about it. The whole thing made me uneasy. Had to do something. He started to shake his head, then paused. "Hold on. I came here to ask questions." "Why am I feeling interrogated?" "Because I'm better at talking," Argrave answered smoothly. "Just because it's weighing at you. You trod across the desert and cause all of us undue trouble. You have to work on that impulsivity. It's a liability. Better than sticking about, waiting. You want something, you've got to." He stopped, then held his hand out and shook his head. "Whatever. I came here to demand some answers about, and what makes you think you deserve answers?" Argrave interrupted at once. "If I hadn't told you anything, you'd be leading your tribe to the slaughter. You'd throw yourselves against Durran and Argent, dying en masse. And then Brim would butcher your people, or perhaps it'd be better to call it dehydrate your people." "Let's clear the air." Argrave pointed at Durran. "You didn't come here for answers. You came here because you can't stand that psychopathic wannabe poet with a spray-on tan played you for a fool, and I stopped you from running off a cliff with your tribes following just behind." Durran's face tensed, anger and defensiveness both seizing him. The door of the room opened soundlessly, and the servers outside stopped at Argrave's ward. Argrave dispelled the ward with one hand, refusing to break his gaze from Durran. The innkeeper and his serving staff entered. "The meal for today's goat meat, with the house spices plus some gold flakes, courtesy of the Lord of Gold, blessed she be," the fat innkeeper explained gruffly. "Some bread from the farms, recently baked, and a soup." "Considering you're mostly foreigners, and one of you is an unmarked tribal." 12 gold. Argrave pointed at Durran. "He'll pay." The innkeeper looked down at Durran, holding his hand out. Durran finally broke his gaze away from Argrave, then reached to his pocket. He counted out the coins, then passed them to the innkeeper. "Enjoy." The innkeeper left them, then he and the serving staff filtered out, recognizing the tension in the room. As soon as the door was shut, Durran began immediately. "First of all, none of that's been established. You don't have a shred of proof. If I hadn't seen you coming from Cyprus, even your association with Brim would be up for question." Argrave laughed as he brought back the ward, blocking out the sound. "What do you want, pal? A journal detailing all of his malice? Maybe a poem or two about sucking your people dry?" "Sorry, fresh out of incriminating things." "Brim promised." "Promised what?" Argrave interrupted. "That he'd leave your people alone. Maybe liberate some of the people underneath Durran and Argent's control, allow them to return to the tribes. And, let me guess, he swore under the name of Fellhorn." "He's a vessel of Fellhorn. You must have thought, surely he can't break that vow." Durran stared wrathfully, and Argrave leaned back into his chair. "You trust a guy willing to kill his own people to get ahead? He's jumping at the idea to get at other vessels, to get this whole town under his control. It's not because he thinks the other 2 are tyrants. It's because he won't share power with them." Argrave tapped his temple. I thought you were a cynic. How do you fall for this scam? You owe me a hell of a lot more than this meal. You owe me the lives of thousands. Annalise pushed a plate closer to Argrave. You should eat, she urged, a bit taken aback by the consideration amidst the heated argument. He picked up the fork without much thought and began eating. Durran stared heatedly, making Argrave find it difficult to enjoy the taste of his food. He had time to finish chewing, and so Argrave continued, look, listen, I get where you're coming from. You feel like you're on a sinking ship, and so you're desperate to find anything that's going to help your people. Argrave waved his fork. Don't let that desperation make you stupid. If there was any dissent among the vessels about the Southern Tribal's fate, things would never have progressed to the point they had. You're dumb, but not that dumb. Durran crossed his arms, and Argrave continued to eat. Stop holding back. Tell me what you're really thinking. Durran shook his head. Argrave lowered his fork and started laughing, caught off guard. Durran joined him in laughter. Gods be damned, Durran wheezed out after they'd finished. Look what you've done to me. How am I to eat when you hit me with a gut punch like that, you bastard? Truth is a heavy meal, isn't it? Argrave picked up his fork. It tastes foul, too. But it's good for you. Good for all of you. Takes a while to digest, that's for certain. Durran finally removed his feet from atop the other chair, then leaned into the table, picking up his fork. I don't know. You make a lot of sense, but I'm not sure. Not sure about too much. I have to look into this. Well, whatever you do, don't pull this little stunt on Briam, Argrave said firmly. You'll find that conversation much drier than this one, I promise you. Durran chuckled, weighing the fork in his hand before setting it down as though unable to stomach the food before him. You won't answer me, though, about how you know Jebika? I spoke to her. Argrave shrugged. Where? He asked. Northwestern part of the mountains, crushed beneath rocks. Durran bit his lips. What did she look like? Jet black skin, black hair. Longish, I suppose. Sharp, big nose, a bit angry looking, and a pretty broad chin. And her eyes? Argrave paused. I don't know. I didn't gaze into her eyes as she died. Bit weird. Yeah. Don't know why I asked. Can't remember, either. Durran picked up the spoon, settling on the soup. He looked confused. Argrave enjoyed the meal, feeling quite self-satisfied with the contemplative silence that followed. Pretty good, isn't it? He nudged Annalise's elbow. Very hot, she confessed. It is too much. Come on, Argrave pressed. The more you eat, the easier it gets in the future. Durran swirled the bowl of chunky soup around, saying little. Finally, he let the spoon go, and raised his gaze to Argrave once more. All right, let's forget all this other nonsense. I just want to know, what's your position in this? You working beneath someone? Rivals from another town? Interfering for the Northern Kingdoms? Wandering prophet, maybe? Got a god to sell me? That last one would explain all the things you know that you shouldn't. Argent has something I want. Can't get it from them directly, so I have to use the tools I've got. Argrave took a bite as he allowed Durran to process his words, and once he'd finished chewing, continued, I could just go along with Briam, but I don't fancy letting the vessels run things uncontested. Hence, I want your people to come out ahead. If things are as you say, I think it'd be best to just let Briam throw himself on the sword. You could, Argrave agreed, though he did feel a bit disquieted at the notion of the Southern Tribals backing out. I know you're not the type to do that, though. PFFT. What do you know about me? Durran leaned back, putting his feet up once more. Let's see. Your father was a tribal chief. You're a self-studied mage after you found some stash of spellbooks. Oh, and you're hiding that fact from the tribe. Especially your father. You like gardening, but this embarrasses you. You killed your uncle because he was, well, worthless. Frankly, you hate the traditionalists of the tribes, but you want to see your people flourish nonetheless. Argrave planted his fork into the meat before him. Need I go on? Durran had grabbed the table while Argrave was speaking, and now he stared wordlessly ahead. Argrave could practically see the thoughts running through his head. Argrave had disclosed things that Durran had never told anyone. He was just shy of having an aneurysm, Argrave suspected. I have some more embarrassing bits, but I spared you from that, Argrave commented. Mostly because I didn't really want to say them. Durran rubbed at his chest. Never thought the first one to take my breath away would be some weird-looking northerner. Gods, Durran stood up, stepping towards his glaive. Argrave watched him. List, he pointed, then stopped himself, curling his fingers into a fist. I've got to go. He grabbed his glaive and then made for the exit. Argrave dispelled the ward, allowing him to pass. Once the door had shut, Argrave grinned smugly and hunched over his food. I think the food is splendid. Argrave shook his head wistfully. Let's take our time. Chapter 132, Intrigue of the Desert. Durran stepped into a hovel on the edge of Sethia, leaning against his glaive. Once he passed the barrier, he shut the rickety wooden door behind him. He stood there, breathing heavily, almost as though wounded. Did you? A man's voice called out, and then the sound of plate boots against wood sounded out as someone moved up to Durran. What's the matter? You're pale. What happened? The man insisted. He wore a helmet depicting a boar, though most of him was covered by heavy plate armor. Durran said nothing, merely waving the concerned knight away. My brain's on fire, he said, shaking his head. Need to sit. He pushed into the room, eventually leaning against the wall. He slid down, sitting. Though the knight stood over him, concerned, Durran's mind was lost in introspection. How could he know? My uncle, I've never told anyone, not my father, not any of my friends, not anyone. No one knows. No one knows, I'm sure of it. But he does. I'm glad my uncle's dead. I'm proud I killed him. But no one should know. Durran could still recall those grey eyes, cold and dead as stone, staring him down. There was a heartless fury in Argrave's eyes as he rattled off Durran's deepest secrets one by one. His words had enough accuracy. It was as though Durran himself was spilling his secrets. It was a summary of his essential qualities, all from a man he'd never met before. What's wrong with you? Ballmask insisted, kneeling before Durran. Is someone in danger? Is the operation? If so, we've no time to waste. In your land, can any know your thoughts? Can any see your memories? With magic, faith, I don't give a damn, can they? Durran lifted his head, breathing brought under control. Ballmask said nothing. I've never seen you like this. Wait to answer the question, Durran growled. No, no one can explore your mind, said Ballmask. If they can, I've never heard of such a thing. No tales, no myths? Durran queried hopefully. That's the realm of the gods, not mere mortals. Ballmask shook his head. Durran lowered his head against the wall. You have no idea how little comfort that brings me. Ballmask grabbed the man's robes, shaking him. What happened? And 0vlas.c0m. He knew you. Durran freed himself of the knight's grip easily. And he knew me, way too damned well, uncomfortably well. Things I've never shared with anyone, he knew them like he did them. Ballmask stayed kneeling for a moment, and then he sat down. He knew me. Your name, epithet, whatever. He knew you were at the raid. Not so hard to guess your name, Ballmask. Durran settled against the wall, getting comfortable. Real genius name. Definitely not something a child would conjure. My old title was much worse. Ballmask shook his head. He knew me. What did he look like? Extremely, uncomfortably tall, could touch the ceiling with his head, that kind of tall. Midnight black hair. His companions were elven. The northern elves. Snow elves, I think you people call them. There was a female with him, one more elf than the southron elves said. Durran rattled off quickly and idly. Ballmask looked at Durran intensely. What color were his eyes? Grey, Durran said immediately. Gods above. Ballmask raised a hand to his helmet. Did he seem sickly to you? Durran paused. He was uncomfortably thin. Yeah, he confirmed nervously. Why are you bringing up your gods? The king of Vesca, Felipe III, has a son named Argrave. Illegitimate. Illegitimate? What in the world does that mean? Durran questioned, confused. Is he not a real human? Some kind of freak, half ghost or something? Born out of wedlock, Ballmask explained. What a stupid thing to call it. Durran shook his head. All children are legitimate. Whatever, I won't question your bizarre northern traditions. Get to the point. Durran waved. You asked me. Ballmask muttered, then continued, the king's son matches your description. And he has the same name. Durran sat in silence for a second, digesting that, then questioned, what does that do for us? It confuses me. Ballmask shook his head. I don't know much about him. He allegedly halted an invasion from the Snow Elves. I don't know the truth of that, but I do know that he brokered an alliance between two noble houses. You're speaking a different language right now. These things mean nothing to me. Durran shook his head. Then put it out of your head. I'll think on it. All you need to know, he's the son of one of the most powerful men in the world. Ballmask pointed at Durran. What did you learn? I learned that we need to talk with Titus, Durran said. And I'm pretty strongly inclined to believe that Brian plans on killing my people. Titus told us not to contact him except in dire cases, Durran finished. This is pretty dire. Ballmask considered this, then posited, Titus may not be entirely forthright, then he might be our primary deceiver. How well do you know him? Would it be wise to get in touch with him? Titus? Durran repeated. He rose to his feet. I know one thing for certain. Titus won't rest until each and every vessel is dead or dying. Now I'm thinking that he might be willing to sacrifice anything to achieve that. Argrave stepped back inside the inn, glad to be free of Durran, though he was worried the man might do something foolish. He hoped that their conversation had rattled him enough to help keep his mouth shut and his actions measured. Though Argrave was half relaxing at this point, glad to be returned to his room, Glimmin stopped him, grabbing his shoulder. There are people in our room, he informed Argrave, staring at the wall which hid the room they'd been staying in. Argrave took a breath and exhaled. The innkeeper, a non-vessel woman, seemed to be only idly cleaning her tableware after serving a meal to the others. She did not seem tense or nervous. After a time of searching, he spotted the only other person in the room. The man stood as Argrave spotted him and walked closer. Argrave, he called out, coming to stand a fair distance away just before a table. Light from the fire burning in the hearth nearby fell across his face. Titus? Argrave questioned incredulously. What are you doing here? Titus, the merchant who'd taken them from Delphasium to Mulgeridum, looked no worse for wear than when they had left. As ever, the well-built former southern tribal wore an extravagant set of red and gold clothing. He gripped the edge of a chair, staring at the three of them. I believe the gentleman was not expecting to see me again, he greeted. Argrave shifted on his feet, the matter of the people in their room still weighing at his mind. That the two were here together, no coincidence, Argrave presumed. You were headed for Melgeridum, Annalise spoke. And you work for Mistress Tasha. Why are you here? Madam Annalise, he greeted her. Did you enjoy the... Just answer her question, Argrave interrupted, feeling annoyed. Titus shifted, adjusting his grip on the chair. He pulled back the chair and sat. I came to find you three, he disclosed, then gestured for them to sit. Argrave stepped closer but refused to sit. You found us. What happens now? Titus' gaze jumped between the three of them. Have I done something to offend? Showing up at the place we're staying, for starters, Argrave spoke. The odd time of your arrival. Let's skip the preambles, shall we? Why are you here? Titus placed his hands on the table, tapping his fingers against the wood. Eventually, he lifted his golden eyes to Argrave and said, Mistress Chryslia, the Lord of Gold, would like to speak to you. She is waiting for you now. Argrave felt a chill. He was already involved with a lot of people that he didn't really want to be involved with, and now another had shown up, not at his doorstep, either, but behind it, already lurking in his room. I thought you said you worked for Mistress Tasha. Argrave crossed his arms. Titus held Argrave's gaze. I never said that. But we asked, and you nodded, Glimmen pointed out. I don't recall ever. Titus rubbed his hands together. I do. The elven vampire said coldly. Titus looked up at the giant warrior, then swallowed. I admit, I was minutely deceptive. But I never imagined you would become so deeply entrenched in the politics of the vessels. I didn't think you would ever get caught in the lie? Argrave interrupted, then sighed. Whatever. It doesn't matter, not anymore. Do you have anything else to say, or shall we go? You agree to come? Titus questioned cautiously. She's waiting in my room. Can't really refuse her, Argrave noted. But Brim has eyes on me. A vessel named Yara won't be coming, not for a while yet. Mistress Chryslia made sure of that. Titus shook his head. You know about that, Argrave noted. I've got to question your role in all of this. Titus had nothing to say to that. He stood up, pushing the chair aside, and then moved to their room. Should we go? Glimmen questioned. He nodded. Be ready, Argrave cautioned, following after Titus. Argrave did his best to recall every detail about Titus. He could recall little. The man was not a major player in the burnt desert, at least not in Heroes of Berenda. He had vague recollection of a dye merchant with that name, someone that would recolor the player's armor and weapons. Even of that, Argrave was unsure. Months had passed, and he had nothing to reference anymore. No more wiki to search. Titus was never someone involved with two major vessels. Argrave was certain of that. This entire thing had come out of left field, and left Argrave feeling very unsteady. What good am I? Tens of thousands of hours spent on the game, yet variables keep popping up left and right to make sure nothing goes smoothly. Some help. I am utterly useless, he chided himself. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned quickly. Do not think that way, Annalise said simply, shaking her head. Argrave felt a brief wave of emotion, but he collected himself. You're mind reading now? Trying to spook me, make me forget? A very effective strategy, he commented with a laugh. She smiled, then pushed Argrave forward. Go on, she commanded lightly. Titus stood at the doorway, holding the door open. Though the innkeeper looked at them strangely as they passed, Argrave made it to the door. Chryslia, the Lord of Gold, sat in a chair at the center of the room. Her features were predominantly elven, and she bore gold in abundance, the same as before. Two vessels stood just behind her. They had the same features as her, golden hair, vaguely golden skin, golden eyes, yet they seemed more imperfect, somehow, like reserves. The mercenary Argrave, she greeted. If that is indeed what you are, I am glad you decided to come without issue. It shows that I am not dealing with someone unreasonable. If people give reasons, I'm sure to respond with reason, Argrave said, stepping in slowly and cautiously. So, what brings you to my humble and temporary abode? Address the Lord of Gold with the respect she is due. One of the vessels at her side reprimanded. Varia, Chryslia raised her hand, silencing the vessel. They come from the north. We cannot expect them to be as couth as we vessels. I take no offense, she shook her head. Please, Argrave, continue as you were. Why are you here? Argrave repeated, considerably more brusquely. Chryslia paused, staring up. I am here to discuss the future of Sethia. Chapter 133, Easy Out. Mistress Chryslia, the Lord of Gold. Though Argrave was embarrassed by his lack of knowledge of Titus, he knew plenty about the Master of Aurum, the Golden Tower on the outside of Sethia. The knowledge came from facing her as an enemy, though. The player could only ever collaborate with Cyprus, and Aurum and Argent would always be one's enemies whether the case. The Chryslia Argrave knew was narcissistic and greedy. She didn't lack for ambition, both for spiritual and physical matters. She would constantly try and expand both her physical wealth and her vessel by draining people, sacrificing their souls to Fellhorn. Typically, both would expand at the same time. She was fond of forcing merchants to infract so she could both seize their wealth and their soul. What did you wish to discuss about Sethia? Argrave inquired, making no move to proceed further into the room towards the three elven vessels across from him. Briam's speech, heretical though it may be, did resonate with me, Chryslia said, crossing one leg over the other. Her gold ankle bracelets rattled against each other, metallic rings echoing about the room like muted wind chimes. Even if he is misguided. Argrave took a breath, and nodded slowly, reminding himself to play the part of a loyalist. Briam speaks a lot of sense, I find. True. The southern tribals, they are unruly beasts, obsessed with war and glory and honor. The fools are utterly unable to set aside grudges, she criticized condescendingly. Well, those tribals still resisting, anyhow. Most beneath our banner have been brought to heel. Someone should do something about that, Argrave commented, reflecting Briam's sentiments outwardly. And that is just the point. Chryslia leaned forward against her crossed legs, very obviously trying to make use of her sex appeal. Annalise frowned and glanced at Argrave but calmed quickly when she saw his stoic face. I tried to broach the subject with Quarus, but the Lord of Silver cannot be reasoned with. Despite being the one who suffered the raid from the tribals, he is adamant we stay our course. Argrave felt an uncomfortable inkling. It sounds to me as though you're coming to view things as Briam does. She did not confirm it, but from Chryslia's expression alone Argrave knew he was right. I cannot very well approach his tower in the open. As such, I have deigned to come to you, a mercenary, largely free of prying eyes. She leaned back. I wish for you to tell Briam this. If he surrenders to me, I will collaborate with him, and be the herald of the flood he so desires to wash away the southern tribals in the mountains. Surrenders how? Argrave tilted his head. If he becomes my vassal, she spread her arms out. It is only the natural course of things. Gold has always stood far above the likes of silver and copper. Argrave nodded slowly. And what of Argent? A city must have a firm central power to properly shepherd the ignorant into doing what is good for them, she said with a smile. I will tolerate no other to contest my power. Quarus has already proven disagreeable. She leaned back further, crossing her arms. Have you more questions, or will you deliver the message? Argrave hesitated for but a moment, then gave a quick nod. I'll get this to him. Excellent, she said, rising to her feet. I will leave you, then. The elven vessel walked past, her two other companions eyeing Argrave as they moved past. Titus was the last to leave. His gaze stayed on Argrave as he left. It seemed emotionless. Once the door shut, Argrave stood staring at it. The Brimacines, as though summoned, lowered themselves from Argrave's clothes and started to prance about the room, playing. Their fur seemed a little darker than before, faintly tan. The souls of the dead were abundant in this place, it seemed, and they had plenty to eat. Annalise conjured a word at once. I dislike that woman. Argrave, that's the easy way out. Argrave interrupted her. And it's walked right into our hands. A lot of the uncertainty, whether or not the southern tribals are capable of fighting the vessels, whether or not I'll be caught playing the double agent. If I persuade Briam to accept Chryslia's offer, and I'm sure I can get the Wraith's heart as easy as anything. Argrave's words brought a silence over the group, and whatever Annalise had to say, she didn't continue. Briam would agree. I'm sure he would. He might betray Chryslia later, but he'd definitely agree now. Argrave turned round, facing his three-party members. We could stroll into Argent and pluck that heart freely. We'd be gone before the sun rises. The next day, headed for the alchemist. Glimmin crossed his arms, staring down at Argrave. Annalise remained silent. Do it then, you damned fool, Garm encouraged. You owe these people nothing. You're no hero. You aren't a savior. Stay in the good graces of the powerful. Regardless of if some ancient calamity is actually coming, having powerful friends here only helps you. Everyone stayed silent, and so Garm continued. Even if you help the southern tribals and all the vessels are purged from this city, the new fledgling government would be of no help to you. They're small, insignificant, and with manifold enemies on every flank. They're good for no one. And considering your covert role, I doubt they'd be grateful. They wouldn't even know you'd helped them. Garm shouted. Garm, Glimmin veritably snarled, turning his face to the severed head. Hold on, Argrave finally spoke up, raising his hand. His eyes were bright with epiphany. Did you get sand in your ears, Garm? Do the vessels seem the grateful type? Well, Garm said, voice muffled from beneath Gilliman's helmet. On the contrary, what we've seen, it's shown us that these vessels don't see people as people at all. Gratefulness, reciprocation, those words aren't in their diction. Argrave stepped around. Long term, neither the tribals nor the vessels seem like good options. Ungrateful pricks, one and all. Might sound like I'm being mean, but it's true. I've met the tribals. Glimmin furrowed his brows, watching Argrave as he paced about. But here's the key difference. The vessels don't care about life. Hell, most of them we've seen have an active interest in draining people's souls. Argrave paused, pivoting on his heel to face his party once again. It'll be easier and safer for us to help force a collaboration between Chryslia and Briam, but dispel these notions of pragmatism versus morality. There's no extra benefit. So, should we erase the last pocket of resistance to the vessels? That's the only question. You might be saving your life. Does safety mean nothing to you? Don't be a fool, Garm insisted. I'd sacrifice a bit of personal safety to do the right thing, Argrave summarized. I think I'm fine with that. Talk is talk. When you die later, there'll be no time for regret. That's just the thing. Argrave shook his head. I've been working hard to become powerful, but I'm still walking about like a little player. He spread his arms out. The whole point of being powerful is getting what you want. No, and I really want to do things my way. I won't die. He shook his head confidently. None of us will. You are a maddening idiot, Garm rebuked. On the contrary, Argrave disagreed. Every time I look in my mirror, it tells me I'm intelligent. That's a fact, strangely enough. He shook his head. Briam and Chryslia are going to have an unfortunate miscommunication. Orym and Argent will proceed onwards as they have been, an attempt to wipe Cyprus off the map. Then, in the ensuing battle, they're going to be removed from power. All of them. Forcibly. Any questions? Not a question. Annalise raised her hand. An observation, though, and a hypothesis. Please. Argrave gestured towards her. Titus knew about Garm, she said with certainty. I gleaned that from his wandering gaze, and his mental state. As for my theory regarding that. She hesitated, a bit uncertain. Titus may have been the one to inform Briam about his existence. Her words made Argrave pause, and he stood there in silence for a minute. He thought back to the journey, and to the man's mannerisms. He had been very generous and pleasant company. His lack of prominence in Argrave's memory made him lower his guard with the traveling merchant. But that journey had been when they were most carefree with Garm. Argrave had set him by the window in an attempt to be nicer to him and win his favor. When they had spotted the brandback, Garm had spoken up. Argrave had tried to cover for him, but Titus had heard the head. That much was for certain. Ha, Garm laughed. I told you it was unnecessary, giving me the window. Look what happens. Yeah, next time I'll encase you in clay and keep you in a bag. Argrave snapped back at once, then directed his attention to Annalise. But what's the reasoning for him being the one that told Briam? He loathes Chryslia. I can guarantee you he does not serve her out of loyalty. It is such a complete and utter loathing as to be uncomfortable, she stated. And he felt guilty when looking at us. Argrave nodded, putting the pieces in place. But anything else? He knew about Yara, and knew she would be coming. Glimmen supported Annalise. Further, he was able to delay her arrival. That might be Chryslia's influence, though, Argrave argued. Chryslia never mentioned Yara. She seemed to be ignorant that Briam did have eyes on you, she said so plainly. She spoke to you precisely because she thought none were watching you, if you recall, Annalise countered. Argrave scratched his chin. It's plausible, more than plausible. But this guy, Titus, I know nothing about him. That's why I was getting all moody earlier. He pointed to Annalise. She nodded. I thought that might be the case. But you cannot know everyone in millions. I should know enough to avoid something much like that from happening. He disagreed. Getting blindsided like this, I'm putting everyone at risk. You sought me out because I'm good at handling risk, Glimmen pointed out. Can't rely on you for everything, Argrave dismissed. Why not? Glimmen asked simply. Argrave didn't have an answer for that. Do what you can. Do what you excel at, Annalise urged. But do not loathe yourself for occasional shortcomings. I dealt with it once. It is an unpleasant thing to constantly undermine yourself. I can't be complacent, Argrave insisted. Too much at stake to settle for good enough. Annalise sighed. You are a maddening idiot, she repeated Garm's words with resignation. Strangely, he did not feel the need to contest the point when she made it. Let's wait for Yara, Argrave concluded, stepping away. Then we'll set things in motion. Or resume things, I suppose. Chryslia's visit doesn't change a thing. In fact, it might just speed things up tremendously. Chapter 134, First Triple on a Still Lake. Though Argrave had wished to inform Briam of what Chryslia had said immediately, the Lord of Copper had been preoccupied with something. Annalise and Argrave spent that time planning for how to handle the changing situation. Ridden with anxiety, he had returned the next day, catching the vessel early in the morning. She told me to know my place? Briam questioned, one hand placed atop the other on the table as he stared at Argrave. Well. Argrave trailed off, acting hesitant to repeat it. Briam sat there for a while in the silence. He tapped one finger against the back of his hand, gazed distant. Eventually, he stood up, pacing about the room. I'll give her an answer tomorrow. He turned his head to Argrave. And things will be expedited because of it. When one is spurned, love can turn to hatred overnight. She must have something prepared for both answers. Chryslia plays both sides against each other. She always has. Immediately after my refusal, there will be retaliation. Argrave took a deep breath and gave a steady nod, resolving himself. On this front, he and Annalise had been correct. He had done everything he could. He could only hope Durran moved as quickly as he did and did not lose himself in indecision. Indeed, we might expect their attack tomorrow. As soon as my answer is given, Briam placed his hand to his chin. This suits me fine. I have everything in place. But you will head to the Southron Elves. You will prepare them, and then I will expect to see them coming to Cyprus tomorrow morning. Yara will accompany you to gather them. No exceptions. He pointed his finger. I will stall for your arrival. Though hesitant, Argrave did eventually give a nod of agreement. She'll have to wear a veil, but I can certainly make this happen. Then make it so, the Lord of Copper snapped. Rushing water is always cleaner than stagnant water, and Cephia will soon become as clean as ever. Why did you lie to me? Durran demanded, holding his glaive to Titus' neck. The blade was made of a black bone, and sharpened enough to rival any blade. The merchant wearing red and gold sat across from him with hands still, maintaining complete ambivalence to the situation. "Because it was easier," said Titus. "Easier?" Durran repeated. "No, I know that's not true. Even if you'd been honest that Briam intended to betray us, I would have gone along with it. You're one of us. You used to be. You know we would take this chance to liberate Sethia. You just wanted us to be unaware. Wanted us to die." Titus pressed his finger to the glaive, pushing it away. "I won't answer," Titus said boldly. "Go. Do your duty. After Chryslia's intervention, the battle will come all the sooner." Durran stood. "Answer me, damn it, or I'll cut your head clean off." Titus' golden eyes remained firm. "You would lose the battle without the men under my control to help you." "I don't care. We haven't attacked yet. I can call this thing off. I still have that luxury." "If you won't explain yourself, I'll ruin whatever you had planned." Durran readied his glaive. "Durran." Bbook interjected, voice cold and cautious. He stepped up beside Titus. "I won't answer." Titus shook his head. "Stop bluffing." "Sit." Durran swung with all his might, rage fueling the swing. Titus remained still, yet closed his eyes. Yet a ringing sounded out as metal met metal. Bbook held his hand against the blade. It had bit through the gauntlet's plate, cutting into the knight's hand. Blood dripped out. Titus had his teeth clenched, staring at the glaive. Sweat dripped down his brow, but he stayed firm. "I'll kill you too, pig." "Don't think I won't," Durran said coldly. "These are my people's lives," and he was ready to throw them away. He would see them battered and broken in the streets of Sethia. "I need a reason to let him keep breathing." "This is not the answer." Bbook shook his head, voice tight with pain. "It is an answer. Even if it's wrong, it's an answer. I don't like leaving questions unanswered. You see." Durran pulled his glaive back. Bbook stepped in between Titus and Durran. He drew the mace at his side, holding it in his hand. "There is no sense in this." Bbook shook his head. "I won't allow things to fall apart. Sethia must be liberated. The injustice here cannot persist." Durran took a fighting stance, holding the glaive before him. "Tolerate one injustice to end another. Whatever happened to the honor you constantly talk about?" "This isn't an easy choice for me," Bbook replied. "But we cannot let things fall apart. After things have settled, I will help you bring Titus to justice. But not here. Not now. I can't work with him." Durran yelled. "Not until I get answers. So step aside, or I'll finally answer that burning question of who's stronger." "This, here, is precisely why I hoped your people would die," Titus said bitterly. "Fine, I will tell you." Durran stood there, not taking his gaze off of Bbook. The armored knight dropped his mace, raising his hands to the air. Only then did Durran relax. "Talk." Then, Durran gestured, standing over Titus. "The vessels, the southern tribals, there is no future in either," Titus said. "The vessels are merely the current tyrant." "What are you talking about?" Durran demanded. "We work together to end the reign of the vessels, establish another foothold for your people to fight back against the unending reign of Felhorn." Titus waved between the two of them. "I have no love for the vessels. They stole my baby from me, claiming it as a vessel. They drained my wife, drained my 12-year-old child. All because he was ignorant of Felhorn's laws." Durran's intensity softened a little, a vague semblance of sympathy weakening his anger. "Yet centuries before, the southern tribals ruled over this vast desert. They wrested control from the Southron elves, burned their cities, butchered their people, destroyed their knowledge." Titus crossed his arms. "And after, the tribals turned their gaze to the north, Vaska. They threw themselves against the Lion's Sun Castle, hordes dying yearly. Centuries of rule, and to what end? Your people achieved nothing." Titus stood up, staring Durran down. "Ignorant savages, condemning their people to death. A tyranny of a different type, a human tyranny. I would not suffer your people's control over Sethia. I wish to build something different, something better. And I won't apologize for that. No matter who got in the way. Is that it?" Durran spat. "Yes, that's it." Titus spread his arms out. "There's your answer. I kept you ignorant because you are the enemy as much as the vessels are." Durran stared him down in silence, hand clenched tightly against his glaive. "We will work together to remove the vessels. With Chryslia's intervention, the battle will come soon. But as far as I am concerned, your people are yet another blight on this beautiful land." Titus shook his head. Durran backhanded Titus, sending him sprawling against the chair. The flimsy wooden thing shattered. He turned in the same movement. "We'll do our part, Titus," Durran said coldly. "And then we'll settle things." Titus stared up at him bitterly, slowly rising to his feet amidst the shattered chair. Bbook's gaze lingered on Titus for a long while, and then he moved for the door, following after Durran. With a direct command from Briam, Argrave had no choice but to leave Sethia immediately, still sore and unrested from the wearying journey to the elves. Things has mostly aligned with their expectations, barring Yara's presence. They arrived back at the flat stretch of sand they had first entered into the Southron elves' territory. Argrave didn't know if the elves had time enough to migrate, but the sword stabbed into the sand was broken. Their magic would no longer function, even if Yara did the correct ritual. He supposed it didn't matter anymore. Anyway, break the seal. Once more, Yara directed Argrave. Argrave looked to Gilliman, who stood behind Briam's trusted vessel. Need to spill some water, first. Time for blood. Gilliman removed his helmet from atop Garm's head quietly, placing it over his own. He set the backpack down. His ebony axe was the only that could be drawn without making noise, and he did so. Yara crossed her arms, ignorant, and began to turn to look around. The elven vampire's axe descended, cleaving into her head. Water burst into the air near 100 feet as though a hole had been made in a dam. Yara staggered towards Argrave, who stepped back to avoid her. She fell, but as her body made contact with the black sand beneath, her flesh turned to liquid and a great mass of water exploded out. The explosion caught all of them, tossing them back. Argrave landed on his back a fair distance away, much of his face stinging where he'd been cut by high-pressure water. A great sphere of water rested where Yara once was, an infant form encased in the center. Argrave could see blood on the back of the baby's head through the crystal-clear water. Focused, he raised his hand and started to use the spell. Electric eel. Blue eels of lightning emerged from his hand, sparking loudly as though crying out in the silence of the night. The sphere of water took on purpose in that moment, going from an unrefined mass of water to a dangerous vessel. Tendrils of water rose into the sky, each and all twisting and writhing towards the three separate targets. The attacks seemed sluggish compared to what they had seen at Maljuridum. That was the effect of the blow to the head, Argrave knew, and he'd long ago instructed Gilliman to do just that. Annalise conjured a B-rank ward with her enchanted ring. Jets of water slammed against the golden shield, and it cracked in a multitude of places. Gilliman seized the initiative, pressing against the vessel's onslaught. Each swing of his ebony axe made the approaching tendrils lose their animation, turning into harmless water. Argrave, though, left himself open, retreating away. Yara's attacks were unrelenting and dangerous. He dodged as best he could, though he had little doubt that his enchanted leather gear saved his life many times. With greater distance, the water needed to be stretched thinner. The orb in the center, encasing the vessel's infant form, began to thin. Common perception dictated that water conducted electricity well. The opposite was true. Water, pure water, unpolluted by dissolved matter, was actually an amazing insulator. Argrave only knew this bit of knowledge because the vessels were resistant to electricity in Heroes of Berenda, a fact which spurred him to research the science behind the matter. He would need to strike very close to Yara's true form to end her, and as such, he needed to stretch her thin. A jet struck Argrave in the cheek, casting him to the ground. His vision blurred with pain, but he remembered his role. The electric heels he'd been conjuring the entire time rushed forward towards the vessel's physical body. The baby was drawn away by a current, twisting about and away within human speed as it tried to get away from the assault. Argrave hounded it as unrelentingly as it had hounded him. The water rushed back, trying to protect the infantile form, but Argrave kept his pursuit up. Blood started to drip into his eyes from the wound he didn't know he had, but he persisted. Eventually, as the water rose up into the sky, sparking eels nipping at its heels, Yara ran out of water to flee into. The electric eels surged into the water, and the infant form protected by Fellhorn's blessing sparked with electricity. After an unbearably longer moment of suspense, the titanic mass of water sagged like a body losing life. Then, gravity seized it, and it all came crashing down, filling the vast pit where the illusion magic formation had once been. Annalise managed to escape the rushing tide of water without getting wet at all. Argrave was far enough he didn't have to move. Gilliman, though, trudged out, water draining from holes in his armor. His expression was hidden by his helmet, but he seemed incredibly bitter. Once he freed his feet of the water, he walked up to Argrave. Patches of wet sand stuck to his armor. "Clean," said Argrave, out of breath. "Not as clean as I'd have liked, but..." Argrave moved to the newly formed pool, using the water to clean his face. "It's done. These things are very difficult to deal with." "I question our chances," commented Gilliman. "She was one of the strongest," Argrave reassured. "A wyvern is a great match for them." The Brimasinners emerged from Argrave's duster, scattering out over the sand and watching Argrave, almost worriedly. Argrave healed his cheek, then searched out other cuts to tend to. "We have stepped past the point of no return," Annalise noted, joining the two of them. If things go awry, then we'll work something out." Argrave shook his head. "Let's get our bearings, and then get ready." Chapter 135, Banners. Argrave's hand emerged from a still body of water, grasping onto a sandy beach. The sand fell away, and he fell back in. A second later, his hand came back up, and he used his elbow to raise himself up out of the water. "Christ," he gasped, water dripping off his face. "Cold. Didn't think about how much of a nightmare this place would be." Argrave felt a colder glaive pointed against his neck, and he raised his head up, blinking water out of his eyes. "That's because it's an emergency entrance to this place," Quentin said, staring down at Argrave with his one good eye. "And I'm questioning how you knew of it." Argrave shamelessly grabbed Quentin's glaive, and the old one-eyed veteran laughed and helped Argrave out of the pool. Soon enough, Annalise emerged, having little trouble freeing herself from the pool. Lastly, Gilliman came up. Weighed down by plate armor, he had to climb up the side of the wall. digging his hands and feet into the sandbank. Conton offered a hand, but Gilliman refused it, coming to stand tall. I'll have to do rust treatment. Again, Gilliman said bitterly. Who's this one? Conton inquired, staring at Annalise. Another friend, completely trustworthy, said Argrave, rising to his feet while shivering. Water's too cold. I hate this. Welcome to Otricksha. You've come a little too quickly. Conton shook his head. We've only just migrated here. Beyond telling Durran what you've told us, we haven't had time to do anything else, least of all deliver supplies to the southern tribals. Yeah, Argrave nodded, shaking himself about to cast off some of the water. The Brumasinners jumped out of his duster, shaking themselves off of all water. Argrave shied away as he was pelted with water droplets. That's because things are moving a little too quickly, Argrave said grimly, shaking cold water off himself. What do you mean? Conton stabbed his glaive into the sand and crossed his arms. The battle will happen tomorrow morning. Argrave conjured fire, holding his face a little close to ward off the cold. Things have gone a lot faster than I thought they might. Conton's one eye grew distant. Gods above. The Lord of Copper sent me here to gather fighters, something I don't intend on doing. Naturally, Argrave assured at once. I know well that your people aren't exactly fit for a large-scale confrontation of this sort. I was hoping, though, that I might get some of the war relics you promised the southern tribals. A sand courser, most preferably. We have backpacks. We left them outside the illusory entrance, because they're filled with books. Not exactly suited for water. Nor is calm, Argrave thought, but kept that to himself. It wouldn't be dangerous, per se, but he still felt hesitant to bring the head into the town in case something unforeseen should come to pass. Conton took a deep breath and exhaled, then nodded intently. A sand courser? I can't decide this. Wait here. I'll bring the others. They're checking out the old buildings, making sure the forges and such still function. The one-eyed veteran took her off in a steady jog, but Argrave paused before sitting down. The enchantments on his gear had warded off the majority of the water from seeping in, but his clothes were still a bit heavier. Do you think these supplies will help, if we even get them? Annalise questioned. If we get them, they'll do more than just help. It'll probably be our linchpin for the raid on Argent. Argrave sat cross-legged in the sand, waiting. Maybe I didn't talk them up enough. I just never thought we'd be the one to use them. Annalise sat down beside him. Gilliman was removing his armor, shaking the water off it annoyedly. I'm a bit nervous, he confessed to Annalise. The Brumasinners came to him, curling up near his legs. A bit? She repeated. Argrave furrowed his brows, then shook his head defeatedly. Fine. I'm really nervous. She laughed, then grabbed his wrist, giving silent support with a gentle grip. Argrave turned his head, locking eyes with her. He said nothing for a time. He didn't know what to say. Something finally came to mind. What happened here? We feed a stray dog. It follows us to our new home, Morven No-Nose shouted out, prompting Argrave to turn quickly and leave his words unspoken. And it brings friends, the Southron elf noted, coming to stand before them. Morven, Argrave greeted, rising to his feet. Everyone didn't expect to see me again so quickly, I'm betting. It's like I was telling them. He just missed us too much, Conton shouted out from the back. The older veterans laughed, and Floramond came to stand before Argrave. Conton informed us of the situation. The battle is to start tomorrow, according to everything I've been told. Yes, Argrave nodded. Floramond turned around, looking at his men. He said nothing, lost in thought, but eventually turned back to face Argrave. All right, we'll lend our support. Argrave smiled and nodded excitedly. That's good. That's great. He praised. The boys and I, we've been talking, Floramond continued. We're old. Some of us. Well, most of us. We're almost too old. Yeah, Floramond has a hard time functioning as a man anymore, Jan called out. I'll give you a crack in the head. Can't function. Floramond turned about, laughing. Their easygoing banter seeped into Argrave's mind, easing his frayed nerves somewhat. As I was saying, we're old enough to fight, but too old to be of much use for much longer. What are you driving at? Argrave held his hands out. The southern tribals. Floramond turned back. There's bad blood between us. For centuries, there has been. Giving them armor, that won't be enough to put that to bed. He looked back to the veterans. We'll be joining you. Argrave's eyes widened. What? Even if the vessels are wiped out, we have to make peace with the tribals, Morven noted. We can't function if we keep wandering about, isolated migrants roaming from hidden town to hidden town. Florimond nodded. We need a place in this new world, and we won't have one if we don't get involved. The tribals need to know we're their allies, not their enemies. The old elf crossed his arms. Durran's a good man, but he can't control everyone's actions, everyone's thoughts. Fighting with them, side by side. They'll never forget that. It'll help if they're afraid of us, too, Jan noted. Well. Argrave put his hand to his chin. I'm not in the position to say no. I can take every bit of help I can get. Then it's settled. Florimond reached up, grasping Argrave's shoulder. We'll prepare. And then, tomorrow, I'll lead my men into battle at your side. It was a cold morning. Durran sat there, watching the suns rise ever higher above the sky. He had donned his armor, wyvern scale armor, and sat atop rocks, arm wrapped around his glaive as it leaned against his shoulder. His wyvern, a great grey beast, lounged nearby, resting. Not a cloud in the sky, Bbook noted, staring out. It'll be a fine day for things. Clouds mean rain, Durran said. It hasn't rained in years. Bbook grew silent at Durran's answer, and the two watched the rising suns in silence. I meant what I said, Bbook broke the silence. I'll help you with Titus, when things are done. And what will you do? Durran turned his head. Give him a fair trial? I don't think we have the same idea of justice. Every man deserves a fair trial. Bbook crossed his arms, plate armor creaking. No matter what they've done. Durran shook his head. Life isn't fair. Don't bother trying to make it so. You'll just end up with a gut full of spite, loathing this twisted world. Durran. Someone called out, and Durran twisted his head back. A warrior wearing wyvern scale hopped over the rocks, making his way over to the pair of them. Durran, it's your father. What happened? Durran rose to his feet. Has he gotten worse? No. The warrior shook his head. Better, actually. Best I've seen him all year. But he's asking to see you. Durran ground his teeth together. Then, he held his glaive towards Bbook. Hold this. If you see Briam's signal, blow the horn. You know the drill. Bbook took the glaive, and then Durran set out, scrambling up the rocks adeptly. Eventually, the mountains cleared up into a large, open valley. The place was beautiful, overgrown with life, a large river running down its center. Homes had been built into the side of the valley, carved out from the rocks. Nearly each and every home had a wyvern just above it, nesting in a cave. People flew about atop wyverns from place to place, and the place was a hive of activity. Durran ran up the center of the valley, moving past the great mass of people as he followed the river. All were readying for war, their weapons prepared for combat and their armor at the ready. People seemed to bubble with excitement, young and old. In the back, there was a crude stone palace. Durran paused at its foot, catching his breath, and then entered with slow, steady steps. The stream running down the valley originated from this place, and consequently, it was well guarded. Wyverns and men both stood at attention here, watching and waiting. None barred Durran's entry, and he made his way for the back. Inside, there was a bed of stone holding an emaciated man with a large frame. His wispy white hair was silver from age, but the man still had powerful golden eyes. He rather resembled Durran, though seemed much sterner. A young woman attended to him. As soon as Durran entered, his father's golden eyes locked on him. Boy! He called out, voice hoarse. Though his father's voice was nowhere near as powerful as it once was, his words still had an almost instinctive effect. At once, he ran to his father's bedside and kneeled. His father grabbed his armor and shook him weakly. What are you thinking? Durran offered token resistance, then seized his father's wrist and pulled it away. Father, you've just woken up. Don't strain yourself. You may make things worse. He looked to the woman attending him. Give us some space. Worse? His father repeated as the attendant left. I've got one foot in the grave. How much damned worse can it get? He wheezed, then coughed. But I hear it. Outside. Men preparing for war. It's a sound I'd never forget. The nervous cheers. Durran took a deep breath and exhaled. Stop this foolishness, his father said at once. You bear my name, Durran. We don't have the numbers to do this. But I won't hear it. I am still chief. This ends, now, Durran's further commanded. You will go outside. You will tell them my order. I will not have the last of our people, the last of our great beasts of war, perish in this assault. Durran stared at his father, saying nothing. Don't give me that look, boy, Durran's father reprimanded. I am still chief. Disobedience will not be tolerated. You have nephews eager and willing to take your place. You're my son, true enough, but the tribe comes before you, before me. You're talking about banishing me? Not talking about threatening. Key difference, boy. The chief shook his head. Now, go, go, he shouted, pointing out the door. Durran rose to his feet, walking to the entrance. The female attendant made to go back inside, but Durran grabbed her wrist. My father said he wished for some time to be alone with his thoughts, Durran said. Give him some time. He'll call you when you're needed. The female attendant nodded, and Durran walked outside, staring out across the valley. His gaze was grim and torn, and he clenched his fists tight. All the times he chided me for being weak. Now he wants me to back off? Durran muttered. Chapter 136, Waves Collide, Amplifying. Briam stared down at the area beyond the walls of his tower, Cyprus, pushing a curtain aside to look through the barred window. A great abundance of people stood at attention behind him. Most of them were ordinary humans, while two were vessels. They were all armed for war. The vessels were in their liquid form, silent and still, water tendrils wound like a snake poised to lunge. At the walls surrounding the foot of the copper tower, a great blockade waited, tense and cautious. Soldiers formed the bulk of the ward, while the vessels, some bearing gold and some bearing silver, acted as the commanders. They were organized, divided into 3 units numbering near 200 each. The frontliners bore great tower shields burrowed into the ground, mindful of the archers posted on cypress walls. Those behind the shield bearers kneeled, watching the walls and the giant gate of the tower between the small cracks in their allies' shields. The industry of Scythia had ceased and many of the people came to watch. Unlike the raid at Argent, the guard was organized, deliberately keeping people inside the walls. But even the guards, too, were consumed with curiosity and nervousness, casting glances towards the Tower of Cyprus. People resorted to climbing the walls of Scythia to get a better view. The archers atop the city's walls did not hinder those people. It's like two animals snarling in each other's face, practically at the throat, yet neither doing anything. Brim mused. Neither want the danger. Threatening. Posturing. The Lord of Copper turned his head back. Though we aren't equals. One is a lion. My lord, Captain Geralian spoke. I don't think we can delay much longer. They've been demanding you appear and be judged for near an hour. It isn't as though we'll struggle in the fight ahead. Brim shook his head. But has he really disappointed me like this? Yara wouldn't let him. She's more than a match for his party. My lord, continued Geralian, frustrated. What should I do? Go and join the garrison. Brim waved his hands, not even deigning to look back. It'll be another hour yet before they genuinely act. Gold and silver, shiny metals and intimidating besides. But ultimately weak and useless. Everything is in place. The captain of the guard moved off. His order received. Brim continued to watch. The lords of silver and gold demand at Brim, Lord of Copper, appear to receive judgment for his heretical ideals. The commanding vessels shouted, remaining in physical form to do so. A man wearing red and gold clothing, his face hidden by a red cloth wrap, also climbed up the walls of Scythia. He looked around, watching the soldiers blockade the gate to Cyprus. He reached into his pocket and pulled free a disc. It was silver, polished to the point it reflected the sun nigh perfectly. He held it level with his face, tilting it up and down in the direction of Cyprus. The light of the suns above reflected on it, blinking at the archers on the opposite wall of Scythia. Though some were annoyed by the light, one of the archers reacted as though awoken. He stepped away from his companions, looking around, and went to an empty spot on the wall. He retrieved an arrow from a hidden crevice and knocked it silently. Before any of his fellow archers could realize what was happening, the man pulled back his bowstring and fired the arrow recklessly at the blockade. The arrow sung as it traveled, leaving a noise like wind chimes in its wake. A purple light trail appeared where it traveled. Those closest saw that this trail of light was composed of strange runes. When the arrow impacted with a soldier's shield, black sand exploded in all directions with tremendous force. Screams of confusion and pain both split the air. The watching crowd in Scythia grew tense with uncertainty, murmuring to each other in shock. A sandstorm started to writhe in the wake of the explosion, black particles twisting about and battering those closest. When the initial confusion settled, a single cry dissolved the uncertainty of the blockade. Attack! One of the commanding vessels shouted, moments before their body dissolved into water. The cry of war was soon echoed by the other commanders who followed the first vessel in assuming their liquid form. Great masses of water exploded outwards, coursing towards the walls at the foot of Cyprus. What? Shouted Brim, leaning close to the window. His composure was broken, but that did not last for long. He turned his head back. Send the signal, he directed one vessel. His confusion and rage vanished in wake of a cold military demeanor. And you, ensure that Archer is caught. The vessels could give no affirmative, but both moved at once, one writhing up the tower's stairs to a higher level. The other moved past Brim, breaking the bars on the window to enter the fray quickly. The soldiers in the room moved, knowing their duty. Brim sat on the window, watching the unfolding chaos. His hand gripped one of the broken bars. His fingers swelled as they clenched the metal as though filling up with water. The iron began to compress, creaking. Below, the soldiers marched to the outer wall of Cyprus. The discipline archers took fire at them as they approached, their job becoming only easier as their targets marched closer. It might have seemed nonsensical. Walls were made to defend. Without an opening, nothing could be done to those inside. One needed a siege engine to break walls. The vessels filled that role. The commanding vessels flowed past the warriors they led, infantile forms trailing along. Their liquid bodies braced against the walls, tendrils of water gripping into the stone. Then, like great battering rams, tendrils of torso-thick water struck out in unison. On the first blow, the thick iron gates rung out like giant gongs, each vessel's blow leaving inch-deep impacts into the metal. The second blow came, wrenching the gates from the walls. The doors barely remained standing, stone crumbling where the hinges had been freed. When the third barrage of water struck the iron, the gates exploded backwards as though blasted, crashing into the poorly maintained gardens of Cyprus. Before the dust even settled, the attacking soldiers marched through the open gateway. The defenders dropped boiling oil at them through murder holes as they passed. It proved to be of varying effectiveness. Many blocked the assault with their shields, while some were hit, screaming in agony as the oil burned them. The commanding vessels did not follow their soldiers in assault. Instead, they writhed up the side of the walls, cresting the parapets and confronting the archers. As soon as the archers spotted the vessels, they let out a primal screech of fear and ran. The closest chose to jump off the wall rather than confront the servants of Felhorn. The vessels rampaged unopposed, pressurized jets of water cutting through any opponents with little resistance. They flowed along the wall, leaving a trail of blood and gore in their wake. Yet as one passed over a grate in the wall, a great geyser of water erupted. The assailant was one of Brim's vessels. The ambusher sought out the infant form of its foe, and the surprise attack landed cleanly. A burst of blood marked the first death of a vessel. At the top of Cyprus, the vessel Briam ordered to send the signal materialized in physical form. Nude in light of her transformation, the woman stepped up to a strange apparatus, grabbing a bag of loose powder and dumping it into a metal cone. She pulled a latch nearby, and then stepped back. A great copper flame erupted into the sky. The sound was deafening, the crude explosion echoing out for miles. The flame was the same size as the tower itself and persisted for only a second or two before dissipating. It left a trail of smoke drifting into the sky, making Cyprus seem like a spent candle. Scythia fell into chaos. The token fighting force assaulting Cyprus was not the extent of the forces within the city. Vessels of differing allegiance moved to action, emerging from their estates and businesses to survey the situation and take action. The civilians in the city ran in a frenzy of fear and dread, their reckless stampede worsening the discord. No one seemed to know the meaning of the flame signal, but soon enough, astute observers noticed the distant mountains stirring. Flying dots emerged from the rocky peaks, and the people felt their hearts beat faster. Soon, these far-off figures took form, solidity, winged forms resembling a locust plague come to ravage crops. As the flying figures grew closer, the roars of the dreaded wyverns echoed against the black walls of Scythia. The people in case knew what those cries meant. To some, it heralded a forgotten past. To others, it was only a call heralding a coming flux. Yet just as the wyverns told the people what approached, actions within the city made it clear that it was not coming. It was already here. Cloaked figures bearing daggers glowing with purple runes stayed near the entrance or prominent places, waiting for vessels to walk past. When they emerged, the hiding assassins ambushed their prey, stabbing with their daggers. Each blow landed sent black sand dancing through the air. A great many of the assailants failed. Vessels were difficult to fell. Elsewhere, archers fired at the vessels that had assumed a liquid form. The chiming of the arrows drowned out the panicked screams, and purple runes danced in Scythia. Each arrow exploded just as the first had, killing indiscriminately. Many more civilians were killed than vessels. Nevertheless, the assault was devastating. In minutes, every military force was mobilized. The guards of the city chose their allegiance. Though those belonging to Argent and Aurum were more numerous, the servants of Copper were well organized, obviously anticipating the rebellion. Brim's men quickly grouped up, seizing a portion of the city that was well defended. They were joined by vessels of the same allegiance. A great many of Fellhorn's faithful were torn between moving to confront the wyvern threat coming ever closer or the traitors in their midst. The purpose of the entire event, seizing Cyprus, seemed to have been forgotten as the city was torn by infighting. Yet beyond the black rock and dirt hills surrounding Scythia, in the vast sand dunes of the great burnt desert, there was a wind stirring. It could not be a normal wind. It picked up black sand, winding it about as it rose ever upwards into the air. This wind continued to speed up, picking up more and more black sand, until it became a small tornado. Purple light shone within the whirling sand and wind, the twisting force rising ever upwards towards the sky. This tornado of black sand bent downwards, bowing towards the town of Scythia. Like a tensed coil, it sprung forward, scattering purple light and clouds of sand in every direction. The corkscrew headed for the Tower of Argent with a singular focus. People manning the silver tower screamed in fear and panic. The veritable railgun struck the side of the tower with considerably less force than it appeared to have. A great curtain of sand descended, forming a stairway right up to the broken window of the Tower of Argent. Near 12 people stood at the foot of the sand mount. Most striking among them were 3 exceptionally tall people with pale skin. "Thanks for the ride," Argrave called out, purple runes swirling around him. "That was the last sand courser we had," Florimond shouted. "How you knew of it baffles me." "Don't think too much. Just focus on the battle ahead," Argrave returned, placing his feet on the sand before him. "You boys have fun." Argrave started to climb up the newly made entryway, heading for Argent. Though he tried to run, he soon slipped, and Gilliman had to stop him, plummeting 10 feet to the ground below. After this, the 3 of them proceeded slowly up to the Silver Tower of Argent. The veteran Southron elves turned towards the chaos ahead of them. Their explosive entrance had drawn much attention. Their figures were vague and uncertain, black armor shimmering against the sand. Each step they left seemed to be jittery, repetitive, and illusory. Their march forward was structured yet seemed unstructured. Such was the power of their magic. Argrave made it to Argent and looked out across the vast chaos of Scythia. "Christ, talk about high stakes," Argrave mused. "Go inside," Gilliman grunted, pushing Argrave into Argent. Chapter 137, Golden Lady. Argent was a decadent place. The walls and floor were made of silver, polished so as to reflect all within its walls. Just about everything else was an imperial purple: furniture, carpets, curtains. These decorations had gemstones, and though bordering on gaudy they did further the beauty of the place. It was truly a home for a lord, by Argrave's reckoning. It was a shame, then, that such a pretty place was marred by the heartless bastard owning it. The moment that Argrave's feet met the silver ground of Argent, he activated the blessing of supersession. It felt like a cork in his chest had been removed, a cork holding back all the world's oceans. His own magic supply felt meager and useless as absolute power rushed over him. The feeling was growing familiar, and that disquieted Argrave. After a second of allowing himself to adjust to the feeling, Argrave held his hand out, using the C-rank electric eel. The magic constructs started to form in his hand, then jumped up into the air. 1, 4, 13, 16, the numbers amplified by the second. He threw away notions of the magic debt he'd accrue, focusing instead on one thing, ending this quickly. You said it's on the 17th floor, Glumman said, looking towards the stairs. Is that up or down? It's the second highest floor, so up, Argrave clarified, stepping towards the stairs. The floor they were on was empty. All within had undoubtedly moved to confront the chaos outside and were on a lower floor. Perhaps some who had been outside would be moving to confront Argrave, having seen his flashy entrance, but he doubted they'd make it here quickly. Argrave kept a steady speed, diverting much of his attention to keeping the ever-growing cloud of electric eels from bumping into a wall and dissipating. He was tempted to send his Brumasinners ahead to scout, but he wasn't confident he could maintain focus if he accepted yet more stimuli. The stairs were, fortunately, a straight shot to the 17th floor. Glumman led, and Annalise covered the back, her single Brumasinger trailing closely behind. She held Garm in hand, the severed head fully exposed. He watched Argrave, expression pensive. Doubtless he had questions about the blessing of supersession. They kept a steady pace for a long while, passing by room after room of varying purpose. After a time, Glumman stopped Argrave. People above. A group. They're scared. Not warriors, he disclosed, voice echoing out from his helmet. Argrave paused, brain struggling between maintaining and growing the cloud of lightning above and digesting the information given to him. Oh, Argrave nodded, the answer coming to him. The breeders. It's how the Lord of Silver maintains their appearance. They're harmless. But there could be guards, vessels. Be cautious. Glumman nodded, and then stepped up with quiet steps. Once they got far enough up the stairs, Glumman ducked quickly, dodging a burst of water struck the ceiling behind and dented the silver. Annalise stepped forward, conjuring a B-rank ward with a ring, and then the party advanced upwards. Jets of water assailed the ward, chipping at it, yet it remained firm. The attacks could not even be compared to Yara's. Two bodies of water danced about the luxurious room. A group of people was huddled in the back, but Argrave could not focus on them. Glumman stepped out from the ward. His bow readied. He fired an arrow at one vessel. The thing did not bother moving. The projectile aimed at a great mass of water and did not approach its infantile form, so perhaps it did not fear the attack. But the arrowhead was made of ebonice, and where it touched, great portions of its body were rendered useless. With its movements hindered, Argrave urged a great deal of the eels swirling above him to pursue the vessel. It tried to flee, but with a diminished mass it was slow. Near 20 sparking constructs struck the heart of the vessel, and it immediately lost all purpose, leaving behind only a charred lump. Its water flooded the room, pushing aside beds. The second vessel in the room closed the distance instead of playing defensively. Glumman set aside his bow and retrieved his axe, stepping out to receive it. As it writhed along the surfaces of the tower while heading towards Gilliman, it peppered them with small attacks. The vessel engaged with Gilliman cautiously, striking out with non-committal attacks while its infantile form stayed in the back. Argrave looked for another opening, another opportunity to jump in, yet the vessel remained cautious. Feeling frustrated by the loss of time, Argrave brought the bulk of his electric eels, sending them after the vessel in a bull-headed rush intended to end things quickly. The vessel retreated, fleeing from the electric eels. Argrave's attacks were fast, though, and soon enough, they managed to hit home. Writhing like a beheaded snake for but a moment, the vessel died and its water dispersed, flooding the room. Argrave looked about, assessing for any danger. Eventually, he relaxed a little. Screams echoed out from the back, and Argrave's gaze was directed towards the huddled people in the back of the room. The majority of their features were snow-white, hair, skin, even eyebrows. There were many women, while only a few males in their number. Nearly all of the females were pregnant. The Lord of Silver is chosen from these people's offspring. Their appearance is perceived to embody silver, and so they're kept here, Argrave explained to his companions with a bitter mutter. The other lords each have something just like this. His voice seemed to spark fear. The majority of the albinos seemed to have a great deal of difficulty seeing properly, judging by where they looked. Argrave continued to use electric eel, intending to replenish the now diminished supply. No one took action, and so Argrave realized he'd have to do something. The vessels are dead, he called out. You should stay here, out of sight. Soon enough, everything is going to be over. Argrave. He heard Annalise call out and whipped his head back. She conjured a B-rank ward as she moved, then pulled Argrave into its cover. A jet of silver liquid slammed into the golden shield. It succeeded in halting the attack only for a second before its sheer power punctured the ward. Argrave tried to pull his head out of the way, but he felt heat on his ear. He'd been cut. The jet hit the wall behind, puncturing the metal and exposing the sky beyond. The Lord of Silver, Quarus, stood at the stairs, descending from a higher floor. His white hair danced through the air, almost alive, and his pink eyes were cold. Argrave prepared to cast his own ward, but the Lord's hand reformed from silver water into its physical shape. Brim's mercenaries, he said coldly, lowering his hand. His body began to bubble beneath his silver robes, expanding. More capable than I imagined. Yet that ends. Battle made Durran forget all else. He'd forgotten his father's decree that he would be exiled. He'd forgotten the coming confrontation with Titus. Perhaps that was why Durran enjoyed it so. Or perhaps it was in his blood. He was from the proud southern tribes, incubated in the fires of war. The wind whipped at his face and he clenched the reins of his wyvern tight in hand as it soared above the city of Sethia. The battlefield had become a site of wanton slaughter. The wyverns of the southern tribes attacked their vessels, leaving those on Briam's side alone, for now, at the very least. Durran was nervous with anticipation, having informed his men of the betrayal to come, and dealing with hundreds alone, fighting boldly on the outskirts of the city, were the Southron elves. Durran had heard tales of their terrifying prowess, and that proved to be true. Durran could not count them because of their strange illusion magic, yet perhaps 10 of them faced hundreds, dancing through the ranks of the enemy and leaving innumerable dead in their wake. "Durran," shouted Bbook above the whipping wind. "I need you to land. I need you to let me off." "What?" Durran returned. "Why, Titus?" Bbook shouted. "His men, they're killing civilians." Durran looked down to Sethia below. It was difficult to spot Titus' men. They moved mostly covertly. Yet still, as Durran flew about, he saw archers fire strange, enchanted arrows that seemed reminiscent of Southron elf magic, though aimed at vessels. The damage caused by each projectile was devastating. People were buried beneath explosions of sand, whipped by sandstorms. "All right," Durran shouted back, pressing down on his wyvern's neck. Recognizing his command, the great beast descended towards the city. It eventually landed on the walls of Sethia, and Bbook removed what was keeping him strapped to the wyvern and jumped down. "What will you do?" questioned Durran. "Help the people get to safety," Bbook shouted. "And deal with Titus." "Should I find him?" he said grimly. In the far distance, a vessel took aim at Durran. A jet of water pumped through the air. Unable to twist his body, he held his hand out and conjured a D-rank ward. It shattered, yet the jet was diminished enough that water splattered his face harmlessly. "Good luck, pig," Durran shouted to Bbook as he pulled on the reins, and the wyvern jumped free of the city walls, ascending once more. As he flew, Durran noticed something emerge from the top of the Tower of Aurum. He thought he was hallucinating. The tower seemed to be growing. Further scrutiny clarified the image. Golden liquid poured out from the windows of the tower, rising up into the sky. It was like the purest honey at points, molten gold at others, and before long, Aurum seemed to possess a golden crown to match its splendor. "The Lord of Gold," Durran muttered to himself. Chryslia, the Lord of Gold, took her place atop the Tower of Aurum. The sunlight above passed through her form, dappling the black desert and the war-ravaged Sethia with resplendent rays of gold. The mass of metallic liquid contorted, shimmered, as if adjusting. With nary a sound, spikes of gold shot out, each and every directed towards one of the many wyverns roaming about. The attacks were deadly and rapid, killing dozens in seconds. They tore through the great beasts, the pride of the southern tribals, as easily as parchment. Their prized mounts descended en masse in a fountain of blood. Durran pulled on his wyvern's reins, and the beast turned only barely enough to dodge the jet of gold directed at him. It tore through a stone building below, destroying it utterly. Durran felt the fear of death in every facet of his being. And he started to laugh. He spurred his wyvern onwards, flying towards the golden monster. The Lord of Gold's form began to shimmer once again, and Durran knew it was preparing for another assault. Durran clenched on the reins tighter, roaring in tandem with his wyvern. Then, from Cyprus, a great blur of copper sprung forward as if launched. Briam slammed into the Lord of Gold, and the seemingly indomitable force was blown backwards. The Lord of Copper and Gold remained suspended in the air Aurum, both falling ever so slowly, stunned. Liquid gold and copper rained down, scattered from the intensity of the impact. The metallic liquid drops turned to water once they contacted the earth. Durran pulled his wyvern around, trying to assess the situation better. The two stunned lords surged to life, both masses of metallic liquid writhing, grappling each other. The battle seemed incomprehensible to a human eye, two masses of liquid contorting, shifting, straining in every direction. The vessel's heart, their infantile form, was not even visible. Durran knew only that he saw more gold than copper. Briam pushed away suddenly, disentangling from the struggle. The Lord of Gold strained out, remaining fixed on the tower. As if coordinated, several purple streaks shot out from the city of Sethia. Durran was certain they were Titus men, but he could not confirm that. The arrows struck the Lord of Gold in tandem, and black sand burst outwards, powerful enough to contest the veritably godlike vessel. Then, Briam's assault resumed. The mass of copper liquid collided with the gold once more. A single copper spike shot through the gold form, and Durran barely spotted a flash of crimson on the other end. Chryslia, the feared Lord of Gold, started to sag. Her golden form turned to sludge, it seemed, blackened and rotted as she was inside. Then, it became water once more, and a great deluge of water fell upon the Tower of Aurum, flooding all within its outer walls. Durran knew, then, that the Lord of Gold had died. Chapter 138, Mirror Room. Argrave had been preparing for, and loathing, the possibility of a confrontation with the Lord of Silver, Chorus. One of Chorus' attacks had been sufficient to completely destroy a B-rank ward, and even left a hole in the silver wall beyond it. Argrave was confident in his enchanted armor. But he couldn't deny his heart was beating the fastest it ever had. He pulled his duster's hood over his head, drawing it tight as he watched the Lord at the stairs. The title of Lord wasn't one fabricated by the minds of men, it was a seat bestowed by Fellhorn. The vessel's non-physical forms took on some qualities of the metal they were named after. The liquid was denser, packing a harder punch while simultaneously offering better defense. Those qualities were dangerous enough. Yet the true issue lay in the fact that the metallic veneer obscured the vessel's heart, their infant body. Argrave had a plan. All of his companions knew it, even Garm. The setting, a room in Argent, was precisely as Argrave expected. They had all they needed to bring this plan to fruition. Yet the fact remained this: they were facing a force vastly more powerful than they were. "Guilliman," Argrave called out, keeping his eyes locked on the Lord of Silver ahead. "A minute left till the cork comes back on. Use the egg, stall, please." "I'll do my duty," Guilliman said before Argrave had even finished speaking. Argrave felt guilt and relief twinned when Guilliman stepped forth, ebony axe in hand. Argrave stepped back with Annalise, heading towards the center of the back of the room, opposite Chorus. The rings on the Lord of Silver's hands clattered to the ground. His earrings phased through his ear, passing through his now liquid body. His necklace, bracelets, they all fell, scattering down the stairs as Chorus' flesh faded in way of his silvery water. "I need to spend my time readying the eels to capitalize on the opening we'll make." "I'll trust you to lead me," he told Annalise bluntly as use the C-rank, electric eel, summoning sparking constructs. "The Brimmersinners will help Guilliman." "Right," she nodded, not taking her eyes off the opponent ahead. Argrave cast a druidic spell, a subset of the spell. Pack leader and his small fox-like druidic bonds clambered down, bunching near his feet. He had given them an order to protect. They raised their heads and sung, their howls like wind chimes. Mist started to rise out from their grey fur like steam, spreading across the room. Chorus' liquid form steadily surged outwards, clinging to the walls so as to surround their party. The already silver walls were replaced by liquid, almost as though they turned to mercury. The water left by the deceased vessels flowed towards his form, subsumed into the Lord of Silver's vessel. The windows were shrouded, and all sunlight ceased. The only thing keeping the place lit was the electric eels dancing above Argrave's head, bathing the room in an eerie blue light. The room's reflections had been bad enough before, but as the silver occupied all of the walls, their reflections stretched on infinitely. Argrave saw himself, the breeder slaves, Guilliman, Annalise, and Garm, each and all reflected without end. The complete inability to stop Chorus' advance gave Argrave a sense of dread and powerlessness, not panic, though. Spread out as he was, Chorus could attack them from all directions. The trade-off for spreading himself thin meant weaker attacks. Weaker meant he was still strong enough to cut through flesh like butter, though. Argrave had been counting on Chorus doing this. Guilliman raised up his hand, holding a black object with an egg-like shape. It had purple runes on its surface. He thrust it on the ground forcefully, and the room became black at once. Guilliman had used one of the Southron elves' war relics. Black sand spiraled out, a great winding tornado shrouding the room in chaos. The sand battered at Argrave from every direction, disorienting him yet further. The only thing visible was Guilliman standing in the center. The sand was least dense there. Argrave didn't know much about the vessel's anatomy, but he knew they still needed to see, just as any human or elf. Already, Chorus sent attacks at the elven vampire. The Brimmersinners' mist warriors appeared at Guilliman's side, drawing attention and causing the Lord of Silver to aim poorly. Annalise led Argrave away, seeking cover behind furniture in the grandiose room. Without sight, Chorus sent out his attacks randomly. Metal creaked loudly when attacks missed, and screams echoed out from the breeder slaves, both rising above the din of the chaos. All the while, Argrave readied his eels ever diligently. 20 or so seconds passed, but they felt like an eternity. As the sandstorm thinned, Chorus' aim became better. He ignored the mist warriors, focusing only on Guilliman. With near 40 eels in the air, Argrave shouted, "Ready!" His words were met by a deadly barrage of silver from the lords surrounding them. Annalise conjured a ward as she led Argrave along. The Lord of Silver's attacks, though spread out and ostensibly weaker, still pierced the B-rank ward. Argrave took hits in the shoulder. The enchantments on his armor protected him, yet it felt like a mule had kicked him. Guilliman reached into a satchel, retrieving a cube. He was about to press something on its surface, but Chorus diverted all his attention to the elf. Numerous jets of silver shot out from the wall, forcing the vampire to dodge. The dodge had been anticipated, though. More attacks followed, a thick volley striking Guilliman just below the shoulder. Argrave barely processed what was soaring through the air until it landed a few feet from Argrave. Guilliman's arm had been severed cleanly, the cube still clenched in its hand. The vampire's cry of agony split the air, reminiscent of the guttural roar of a demon. The assault did not relent there. Chorus sought to finish Guilliman, striking from all angles. The vampire moved differently than he had before, dodging more like animal than something intelligent. It proved effective. Guilliman dodged the next wave of silver spikes, then ran, path unpredictable. The sight of Guilliman's movements brought back repressed memories. and Argrave felt fear as he recalled Barden. Quarus hounded Gilliman relentlessly. The elven vampire ran with speed unmatched, blood pouring from his arm. He headed for the back of the room. There, the breeder slaves sought refuge. Gilliman seized many of the slaves, screaming, and overturned a bed, hiding himself beneath it. Quarus hesitated in the attack, as though fearing to damage the slaves nearby. Argrave felt repulsion, guilt, horror, as he knew what Gilliman was surely doing. With blood, Gilliman would regenerate. In his frenzied state, many would surely die. At the same time, beneath all the guilt was a twisted relief that his companion would not die. Annalise crawled out, grabbing Gilliman's arm and sliding it over to Argrave. Realizing her intent, Argrave kneeled, pulling at Gilliman's gauntleted fingers. His grip proved tenacious, but Argrave freed the cube. Gilliman! Argrave shouted, the Southron elf war relic in hand. The arrowheads. Yet his voice was returned with nothing. Quarus devoted his attention to attacking Argrave and Annalise, evidently unwilling to damage his valuable breeding stock to kill Gilliman. It was a symptom of arrogance. The vessel did not believe his life was threatened. Gilliman! Argrave shouted, conjuring a ward with his ring to block a barrage of silver liquid. He could feel the magic in the ring diminishing. He was running out of wards to conjure. 4, maybe more. The arrowheads. Argrave shouted once more. His voice joined in chorus with Annalise. Another voice broke through the chaos. Hold me up! Garm shouted. Annalise looked down to Garm in her hands. Trust in me. The head shouted. Argrave nodded vigorously, and Annalise raised Garm without a second's delay. A spell matrix conjured before his eyes, and then a black and red wave scattered about the room. He heard another guttural howl. Gilliman's, undoubtedly. Throw the arrowheads! Garm shouted, voice enhanced by a strange magic. The Lord of Silver attacked once more, foregoing small rapid attacks in favor of a single strong one. It proved effective. This time, it broke past Argrave's ward, taking him in the leg. Argrave fell to the ground, screaming. As he lay there, a bag landed beside his head, black arrowhead spilling out. Argrave pushed past the pain. Grabbing the bag of arrowheads, he pushed an indent in the cube, and it lit up with purple runes. He loaded the spilled arrowheads into the bag, then cast the cube inside, giving the bag a shake. In no position to manage a good throw, Argrave held the bag out to Annalise. She understood what he wanted. Taking the bag in hand, she tossed it to the center of the room. As it bounced before coming to a stop, Argrave feared the bag would open, and the cube would slide out. Yet it did not. Argrave took cover behind a bed, bringing Annalise along with him. Purple light exploded outwards from the bag. Argrave felt small fragments batter his body and lost all hearing. All sound was replaced by a constant ringing. The ebonice arrowheads had been caught in the center of the war relic's explosion, fragmenting and scattering about the room. Once even the smallest shard of fragmented ebonice met with the vessel's body, they would dispel his power vested in him by Fellhorn. It was but a moment. But that moment was enough to expose Quarus' heart. Argrave spotted Quarus' true form at once, newborn form suspended in the center of the room as it clung to the ceiling. Though the ebonice fragments had struck some of Argrave's electric heels, dispelling them, enough remained. 4. He willed them towards Quarus' infantile form. The vessel saw its coming doom and tried to relocate its body, but it was split apart too severely to flee. The electric heels struck home, sparking. Argrave saw something fall. He couldn't distinguish it at first, but he realized Quarus had severed his connection with the water to avoid being hit. The vessel's infant body landed atop one of the breeder slaves' beds. It cried loudly, like any infant might. Argrave sat up in panic, causing another wave of blood to pour from his leg. He raised his hand, ready to dispatch it with a final spell. One of the slaves stood, running across the room. He feared the woman intended to protect the child. She reached her hands out, and Argrave steeled himself to finish things as his hearing returned. Yet he did not have to. The Lord of Silver's slave dealt the finishing blow, screaming out in rage and sorrow. Silence followed, and time seemed to freeze. Then, all of the water in the room turned black, then exploded outwards, surging out the windows and the freshly made holes in the wall. Argrave collapsed backwards, barely able to keep his head above the rushing tide. Annalise pulled him atop one of the beds. You are bleeding. Stay still, she directed, setting Garm aside. I will heal you. Just the leg. Argrave shook his head, teeth clenched tight. Just enough to walk. Then, check if Gilliman is fine, physically. And otherwise. We have to hurry. Not much further yet. I live, cut in a cold growl, and Gilliman moved across the room. He held his helmet in hand. His mouth and neck were covered with blood. The stump where his arm once was already twitching and writhing. It grew, reconstituting. Argrave tensed as Gilliman approached, fearing the vampire. Gilliman strode up to Argrave's bedside and grabbed Garm by the hair. What did you do? Gilliman demanded of Garm. Saved everyone, said the head. The hunger. It's afraid of you, Gilliman insisted. It's necromancy. Obviously, Garm spat. Gilliman. Argrave raised his hand up. Let go of him. It's over. Gilliman looked down at Argrave. It wasn't rage in his eyes, nor bloodlust. It was something else. Argrave couldn't place it. But eventually the vampire acquiesced, setting Garm down gently. Argrave's Brimosners jumped up to the bed, sitting beside his stomach. I We'll watch the stairs, Glumman said, putting his helmet on. He grabbed his arm off the ground, then moved away. Argrave looked at Annalise, seeking her insight. She shook her head. He isn't fine, but he can get through this. Argrave nodded, stifling his uncertainties. He knew the spell Garm had cast. He wasn't worried about Glumman's condition. The spell, Voice of the Corrupt, merely terrified the spirits of the undead. Argrave supposed Garm had used it to bring Glumman back to his senses. But that spell was B rank, meaning Garm was capable of using spells of that rank. That, alone, was alarming enough. Yet the spell used fragments of souls. Typically, a necromancer would use sacrifices to fuel it. Failing that, one's own soul would degrade. Argrave stared at Garm, complicated thoughts disturbing his brain. No time for the third degree, not now. He's an ally, even if I can't trust him. His life is tied to ours, and I know he wants to live. The Wraith's heart is close at hand. And after that, the Lord of Copper. Argrave lifted his head, feeling the soothing healing magic from Annalise seize his leg. Let's end this well, Argrave said aloud, looking up at Annalise. She met his gaze, then gave a determined nod. Chapter 139. Biggest Prize. Argrave grabbed a silver handle from a shelf, pulling free a black box. It was large, and he was unprepared for the weight. Annalise put her hand beneath it to stop Argrave from dropping it. They lowered it to the ground together. It was a black cube chest with a silver locking mechanism. The four of them stood in Argent's treasury, entirely unopposed. The place was a fitting treasury for the Lord of Silver. But quite disappointing for Argrave. Fine art, silver statues, or sculptures of lords past might indeed be quite expensive, but Argrave would have preferred enchanted items. In Heroes of Berenda, you might be able to sell an expensive painting to a blacksmith. That wouldn't fly here. Instead, Glumman wrenched free gemstones from statues and poured boxes of jewelry into their lockbox. Once the box was full, he moved on to the backpacks, haphazardly tossing valuables in alongside the books and supplies he held. The elven vampire still had a grim air to him. He was far paler than normal, and instead of he seemed enraged. His arm had healed to the elbow already, yet it seemed to be taking much out of the vampire. He drank from his flasks very frequently, draining them one by one. Argrave knelt down to the chest, lifting it open. Quarus had not bothered to lock it. There was a silver medallion within atop a pillow of purple silk. It was a strange, primitive-looking thing, with strange letters on it. In its center, a woman held a horn up, pouring water from it. The inheritance medallion. Argrave raised his head to look at Annalise. With this gone, no more Lords of Silver. No one will ever hold this seat again. Annalise looked at him seriously. Is that prudent, taking it? Well, the ancient gods are a bit more vindictive than the others. At the same time, they don't pay much attention to the mortal world, I think. Argrave took the medallion. Destroying it might be problematic. Merely taking it, though. Argrave weighed the medallion in his hand, then stuffed it into his pocket. Every bit helps. Argrave stood from the box, walking to a corner of the treasury where things remained more on the curio side of things. He opened a few boxes. Most of them were worthless things, truly just oddities, but eventually, he saw what he'd been looking for within. He turned the box in question about. A grey, slightly transparent model heart lay within the plain box. Argrave touched it. The thing was lifelike enough that Argrave would not have been surprised to feel heat, but it was dormant. In the wake of the grim battle not moments ago, he could not muster the excitement he'd been anticipating at obtaining the Wraith's heart, the final piece he needed to become black-blooded. Time to go. Argrave turned around. Leave the rest of the treasure. Maybe the freed breeder slaves can take. Argrave trailed off, feeling the words weren't fitting with Gilliman's presence. We should assess things in Saethia, alter our plans accordingly, Annalise suggested. Getting out is more important than doing some people watching. Quarus made a big commotion, both by fighting and dying. Might be some of his underlings are sauntering up those stairs. While it's a fight we can win, I'd rather sidestep it altogether, Argrave commentated, stepping towards the stairs. What of the albinos? Annalise asked quietly. They saw. Leave them, Glumman interrupted. Please. I've done enough damage. Argrave stared at his vampire companion. He couldn't recall him ever saying please before. Glumman. You couldn't walk, Argrave, he interrupted. He raised his severed arm up. The forearm was already taking shape. I could have done something. I took responsibility for all the pain my hunger causes when I chose not to die all those years ago. Argrave could say nothing in response, and so he turned towards the stairs. Durran's wyvern reared back its head, swinging its horns upwards into the vessel's body. The water resisted like taut rope, but eventually the wyvern's strength prevailed, and water scattered. The vessel's heart pulled away, seeking safety. Durran cut the straps on his saddle, freeing his body from the wyvern's back. He strode up his winged reptile's head, jumping from its snout in pursuit of the infant form of the vessel. The distance between him and his target seemed too great, even with the reach of Durran's long glaive. As he dropped, he readied a spell in one hand. He threw his glaive forward, and then sent out a burst of wind magic to propel his weapon. The glaive whistled through the air, striking the vessel's physical form cleanly. Durran fell more than a dozen feet, landing on solid stone. He grunted in pain, glancing down at his leg. Blood dripped out of his wyvern scale boots, onto the paved streets. Something had broken, obviously, and badly. Water rained down on him from the dead vessel. He laughed as it drenched him, teeth still clenched tight in pain. He stood on one leg and hopped down the street, keeping a hand to the wall to support himself. He retrieved his glaive, then whistled. His wyvern craned its neck down to reach him, and Durran grabbed hold of its horns, maneuvering gracefully until he took a seat on the saddle. He pulled up on the reins, keeping a low profile to avoid being pulled from the back of his mount by fierce winds. Durran's wyvern was one of the few still remaining in the sky. Others had been injured and could not fly. Others were outright killed. Their attacking force had been devastated. Yet the city of Sethia more so. At this point, ruined buildings has become more common than standing ones. Corpses lay everywhere. The streets were buried beneath black sand and rubble. As he flew higher, his gaze went to Argent. Water poured from one of its top floors. The Lord of Silver had been fighting there. And judging by the waterfalls coming out of the windows and freshly made holes, he had lost utterly. Durran couldn't picture what had gone down there. He had seen the Lord of Gold. He had been seconds from dying to her. He could not picture a way to end her. But more presently, he saw the Lord of Copper. The copper mass of liquid seemed indomitable as it writhed about the city, dispatching opponents indiscriminately. Briam had not yet betrayed them, but Durran could see it coming as clear as day. This well-executed betrayal on Briam's end showed his true nature. And more simply, Titus had confirmed it. The men underneath Titus were much of the reason the city had become as it was. Though Durran did not know how, they brought a great drove of weapons to the field, Southron elf war relics. Titus' people destroyed many vessels, yet their victories came at a great loss of life. Durran held his hand to his leg, casting low-rank healing magic he knew in some desperate attempt to heal his wound. As he soared above, he saw the last of Briam's guardsmen storm the final holdout of the forces beneath Argent still standing in Sethia. An overwhelming feeling of dread came over Durran as he realized that things were coming to a close and the truth would come to light in seconds. Briam took form atop one of the highest buildings in Sethia, the bell tower. The bell had fallen down and crashed amidst trouble, but the top of the building was largely intact. Briam, human form reassumed, sat on the edge, observing the battlefield. He was furious. Things had gone very well. His forces had defeated all of those within Sethia with ease. Though he was worried about the confrontation with Quorus, his worries were unfounded. The mercenary, who he initially thought had disappointed him, proved to be far greater than what he promised, single-handedly eliminating the Lord of Silver. Yet Titus had ensured that his conquest turned him not a verdant paradise, but a war-torn ruin. The southern tribals and the citizens both died in numbers far too great. Briam had wanted Sethia. He seemed likely to obtain a shadow of its glory now, and even as he watched, the southern tribals moved away from his men, moved away from the heart of the city. Their movements made it obvious, they knew of what Briam intended to do. Another machination of Titus, to be sure. As Briam sat, far removed from the conflict, his vision twisted. He was drawn to the sight at once, for his vision was typically flawless. In the far distance, two bulls attached by a rope whirled through the air. They stayed suspended in midair, unmoving, purple light whirling around them. Briam squinted. They seemed to be growing, far in the distance. Briam felt curiosity, but no danger. Briam's head reeled back and he grunted in pain. The bulls hadn't been growing larger, they'd been growing closer. Magic must have affected his sight. He stood, climbing further up the roof. His vision was dyed red and distorted, and he was near certain his cheekbone had been cracked. As he turned, he saw a glaive swinging for his chest. Briam raised a hand, but the glaive soared over and struck his neck. No blood came, though. His flesh had already liquefied. Damn, cursed a warrior whose words sounded muddled. His voice sounded like something was wrong with his nose. Should have gone for the neck first. Briam's flesh morphed into liquid, and his copper body spread out. The Southron elves swarmed near him like pests. The Lord of Copper could not distinguish where they were. They seemed to be 20 and 5 simultaneously, blinking in and out of existence. Think we need the biggest prize, boys. Quentin shouted, voice distorted and echoed by the strange illusion magic of his people. Well, the biggest left unclaimed. It's third place, but it's on the rankings. Only way the people won't forget our generous contribution, am I right? We can't make a trophy out of it, Floraman noted, voice similarly garbled. Turns to water, after all. At least we can drink him. Wonder if he tastes like copper. Briam took in the waters vested in him by Fellhorn, letting their nature calm his rage before he blindly attacked the new foe. Chryslia and Quorus both died because of arrogance. I will not meet the same fate. The Lord of Copper surged down the bell tower, striking its base. The thing cracked incredibly loudly, then began to crumble. The bell near the top fell once more, ringing once before being smothered and muted by rubble. His vision was affected by the blow to his eye, but he still had sight sufficient to get to a place of safety. Briam took flesh once more. We go on the defensive. Follow my lead, he shouted. Heed my words. as the new Lord of Sethia. Leaving this directive, Briam once again assumed his liquid form. The people under his command obeyed his command quickly and relayed his command just as fast. In not a minute, the quieting battlefield once again became consumed by conflict. "It runs well," complimented a voice from behind Briam. A mighty slash followed it, meeting the Lord of Copper's form. It was ineffective, but Briam reeled away due to the fact that he was entirely ignorant of his foe's approach. "This'll be troublesome," noted Florimond, standing atop a high building. Briam fired a copper jet, yet it seemed to pass through his chest as though the elf wasn't present at all. "We have to hit its heart, don't we?" Morven said, standing atop Sethia's walls. "A bit hard to see. But as long as we keep at it, we're bound to hit something. Or I guess we'll die." "Told you not to throw that damned sling," Jan rebuked. "Could have chopped his head off." "Don't give him a hard time." "That big pale bastard," Guilliman said. "He axed one on the head. It lived." "Wouldn't have been that easy," Morven returned offensively. The Southron elves stood before the Lord of Copper, isolated amidst enemies. Yet the Lord of Copper stayed still, cautious of his incomprehensible foes. Chapter 140, Division of Power. The dangerous thing about Briam is... Argrave trailed off as he stared out over the city of Sethia, standing atop the mound of sand that had been built by the sand courser. Argrave had chosen what he thought was the right thing. He'd endeavored to liberate the city from the hands of the vessels, even if it did create some uncertainty and loss of time. Yet now, Sethia was the worst he had ever seen it. Heroes of Berenda never had an outcome with such devastation, such loss of life. "What is it?" Annalise interrupted Argrave's thoughts. Argrave shook his head. "The dangerous thing about Briam is that he always fights as though the opponent is stronger, cautiously, with contingencies. All the desperation of a cornered rat. Guess that was something taught by being surrounded by two powerhouses, silver and gold." Argrave kneeled down. "Those damned Southron elves, I'd ask what they're thinking, but I know. Honor and glory." "Argrave," Guilliman called out. "Skyward." Heeding Guilliman's words, Argrave looked upwards, scanning the blue sky marred by drifting black sand. A grey wyvern cut through the air at them. Argrave stood, readied, yet it began to slow. Durran's wyvern gripped onto the side of Argent, using wings and legs both. The claws against metal creaked unpleasantly, sounded like nails against a chalkboard, almost, yet the creature did stop. "Hey," Durran called out, shouts rising above his wyvern's labored breathing. "I've got a trade for you." "War profiteering?" Argrave returned. "Hardly the time, I've got things to do." "Heal my leg," he pointed down, "and I'll take you to the skies." Argrave furrowed his brows, looking to Annalise. She nodded and whispered, "He is being serious." Argrave turned his head back. "We want to get near the fight with Briam." "Gods above." Durran shook his head. "Fine. I'll land near the bottom of this mound. Come quickly." "Think I feel my damned leg bone pushing against the armor." Argrave flashed a thumbs up, then turned to move. Behind, Durran's wyvern soared through the sky. Powerful winds assailed them, loosening sand, and Argrave slipped. He collapsed to his back and started to slide down the hill of sand nauseatingly quickly. The brimsters in his clothing yelped in terror as Argrave used all of his spatial coordination to stop from careening off the side. The terror ended when Argrave's feet met the ground outside Sethia. He straightened his back and shook his duster free of sand, doing his best to act as though he wasn't on the verge of vomiting in fear. Durran's mount landed a fair distance away, walking on its two legs towards them. The southern tribal fell off his mount's back ungracefully, landing on his side. Annalise rushed down, but instead of tending to Durran, asked Argrave at once, "Are you hurt?" "Some bruises tomorrow, maybe." Argrave shook his head, very proud his voice didn't waver. "Deal with him." Annalise moved to Durran and started to treat his wound. The man did indeed have bone sticking out of his leg, but with everything still attached, he could be healed. Argrave and Guilliman put their things in the wyvern's saddle, preparing to ride. They paid special attention to Garm's situation, ensuring nothing would come free. In 2 or so minutes, they were ready to move. It felt like hours to Argrave. "Magic is a thing of beauty," Durran sighed as he tested his leg. "Ruminate later," Argrave directed, pointing to the wyvern. "Lift off, pilot." With one final step, Durran moved towards his mount, gracefully assuming the rider's position. Argrave got atop its back as well, followed by the other two. "Heavy load," Durran noted. "She can take it." Argrave shook his head. Durran pulled up on the reins, looking back. "How do you know it's a she?" he questioned as his beast took to the skies. "Larger horns, cleft tail," Argrave said at once. With a jump and powerful beats of its wings, the gargantuan reptile started to gain altitude. Argrave was fine with heights, but he could not deny he felt nervous. "Did you really kill the Lord of Silver?" Durran questioned, shouting above the noise. "No, I found him like that," Argrave shouted back, holding onto the back of Durran's saddle. "Genius question." Durran asked no more questions, holding his glaive in one hand and the wyvern's reins in the other. He led his mount towards the distant battle between the Southron elves and the Lord of Copper, where purple light and echoing booms danced about the air. Titus men, coupled with the southern tribals, had taken care of most other resistance. Riding a wyvern was a terrifying yet wonderful thing. He could feel the beast's presence beneath him, and his body shifted slightly every time it moved its wings. The wind battered at him intensely, wearing at his grip constantly unless he kept a low profile. The speed was not ludicrous, yet it was far faster than was comfortable. The experience made Argrave think of freedom. Strangely, with trepidation, Argrave freed one hand, using his own magic reserve to conjure more electric eels. He stopped at 8, for he felt half of his magic was gone by that point. The sparking constructs easily kept pace with the wyvern. "I'll land with my allies," Durran called out. "They're preparing to help the elves, looks like." "This fine with you?" "Yeah," Argrave answered. Durran started to bring his beast down, and Argrave soon realized where he wanted to land. Men cleared out of the way for the wyvern to land atop a largely ruined building. The wyvern collapsed amidst trouble, and Argrave gingerly hopped down from the creature, landing beside its wings. The Brimsoners emerged, finding flat ground as solace. One of them climbed up to his shoulder and nipped his ear, as though to express its displeasure at the constant rapid movement. Argrave could not muster indignance. "This satisfies you?" called out Durran, not dismounting. "Yeah, I'll take things from here." Argrave nodded. "That's elven magic." A man's voice roared out. "All the deaths, tribals and city dwellers alike, they were caused by Southron elf weapons, Southron elf interference." The voice was loud enough that it could not be ignored, and Argrave turned a tired head towards its source. "They may be fighting at our side, but they are not on our side." A grisly tribal insisted. "Bellad!" Durran shouted. "Now is not the time." "Unity." Many in the crowd echoed Durran's sentiment, shouting their agreement. "Unity cannot bring back my brother." Another disagreed, a guardsman from Sethia, likely under Titus. "That elven magic, we see it happening even now, in their battle against the vessel. There is a reason our ancestors wiped the Southron elves out. Let them fight the Lord of Copper alone. Regardless of the winner, we end them after." Argrave felt the need to say something, but he was an outsider flanked by elven companions, and moreover, none of these people knew him. His voice was a foreigner's voice. He knew his contribution would be unwelcomed. "Annalise?" Argrave questioned, hoping she might think of something. "All I can think of is helping the Southron elves now, having them speak for themselves," she suggested. "All right, best we've got." Argrave nodded, then grabbed her elbow, moving her along to the distant fight between the elves and Briam. But then, a bell rang out, and everyone's attention was directed to that. Once the loud sound quieted, a voice rose above it, shouting, "People!" Titus stood at a high point, overlooking the crowd. He held something to help project his speech, only a cone, but it sufficed. "People on the roofs," Glimmer noted. "Archers. We should be ready to find cover. Especially if they still have those elven arrows." Argrave scanned around, barely spotting them with Gilliman's directions. "People of Sethia," Titus shouted out. "The magic weapons used in today's battle were not from the Southron elves," he disclosed grandly. "It is their magic. But they did not give them to the combatants." A chorus of voice saying a multitude of things followed, but Titus turned around and rang a large bell once again. "The Southron elves got involved in this fight because of one man." Titus held his hand out. "They gave this man supplies, relics of their people, and even joined the fight themselves. They are our allies." Argrave frowned, catching where this was headed. The southern tribals within the crowd, too, caught on at once. Durran distributed the elven war relics to agents within the city. Titus pointed. The elves trusted that man with their weapons, and he ordered the wholesale slaughter of the people within Sethia, to ensure his control of the city would be completely unopposed. "That's nonsense," Durran shouted. "Complete garbage. I didn't even know the elves were coming to the fight." "People of the tribes," who was the sole point of contact between the elves and the tribes. Titus spread his arms out. It was Durran. He was the sole person to speak to them. Argrave had a bad sensation in his stomach as his brain followed people's thoughts. Durran was the intermediary between the tribes and the elves. Durran was one of few tribals to leave the tribes and enter the city, usually secretly. The tribals had no idea of who he spoke to. The elves had promised weapons alone to the people of the tribes. Argrave wasn't sure if this was public knowledge, but it was a damning thing if brought to light. All of these points in tandem with people's grief and rage. Simply put, Durran was shaping up to be public enemy number one. Argrave looked to Annalise, and she looked very worried. Argrave shouted out, "I brought the..." His voice was quickly drowned out by the thousands of others. He had wished to bring his role in things to light, enough to stall for time to get the Southron elves to weigh in. "Argrave," Annalise spoke into his ear. "We should prioritize dealing with Briam. None of the truth can be brought to light if the elves don't." An explosion rocked the earth, and Argrave's head darted to the side. A blast of purple magic of the same magnitude they had caused within Argent filled the sky above Sethia. Copper water showed the streets and roofs, reflecting the sunlight splendidly as they fell. Then, the copper water turned to black. "1. Argrave spoke as he realized. "We need to hurry." He pulled Annalise forward. "If we're to remedy this, the Southron elves might be the only way we have." Annalise nodded. She and Gilliman followed behind Argrave, hurrying to the site of the battle. The place was utter mayhem. The streets had been torn apart. The buildings were nearly all collapsed, and there was a great crater in Sethia where the battle had been centered. Many of the veteran Southron elves lie dead, their illusory arms still flickering and distorting their figure. Argrave scanned things, horrified. looking for any alive. He spotted one person kneeling before a body, and rushed up. Florimond knelt there, hand to his chest. Morven lay before him. It looked like he had been cut across the chest. The wound was deep, cutting past the ribs. He was dead. He's joined his daughter, now, Florimond called out as they approached. They're all joining family members. All except me. Florimond. Argrave began, hesitating to ask him for help yet again in wake of the death before them. Don't call me dead yet, another voice cut in, and Argrave turned his head. Contin pushed out a piece of rubble, then collapsed. Got my leg. God damn it all. Florimond stood from Morven's corpse, moving to help Contin. He supported the man with his shoulder, and the two rose to their feet. The wound to his leg couldn't be healed, the flesh had been severed completely. Fortunately, the bleeding was staunched. Argrave, Florimond called out. We won. Argrave was stunned, but he replied, you did, almost habitually. And we won alone, Contin noted. None will forget that. Florimond threw one of our relics, smacked it with the side of his glaive, right into the copper bastard's mass. The thing exploded inside him. Devastating. Contin shook his head. Argrave nodded, then decided to bite the bullet and tell them what was happening. I can't let you rest yet. Someone was using our magic, Florimond noted. I know it. And we need to clear our names. It may be beyond saving, Annalise noted, watching the crowd. The whole crowd is aflame. And many of them are collaborating with Titus. His people are the most numerous in the crowd, I am sure of it. If he can buy their loyalty in battle, he can buy their words in a crowd. Argrave took a deep breath, mind-walling. Titus wants complete control of the city, he said. I agree, Annalise nodded. He wants to eliminate all competing leaders. There is only one left, now, Durran. If you like this audiobook, subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And join my Patreon if you want to support me, where you can find the complete collection Jackal Among Snakes audiobooks. Hurry up. What are you waiting for? Leave some comment and let me know if you guys like this story, or you have a web novel you like and want to hear its audiobook. I will be happy to create them for you. Please like, share, and leave a comment on the video.